I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge. It doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities.
Once something like eating is death, then you've struck at the very heart of life. The enemy of the older radical theories may have been the ruling class, but today the stakes of whether we will reform ourselves into a new kind of human being, a new kind of society, whether we will find selves worth being, the stakes of it are simply life itself.
As modernity has created promises that it has no ability to keep. What this means is that we're a society of disembedded individuals, stuck in the impossible situation of being alone together. And what was understood as emancipation has proved to be a form of isolation. It is important to understand that what I am telling you is not simply a cultural history. It's a description of the story that shapes every single person that you know. This is why there is a rise in mental illness. It's absolutely concurrent with the disembedding of the individual, because individuals can't constitute themselves by the very nature of the case. Subjectivity cannot sustain its own weight. We need others to tell us. But we've been given an ethical mandate by the Enlightenment that tells us that that's immoral, that nobody should constrain us.
Welcome to another episode of Dustbowl Diatribes. This month we're honored to have on Bert and Emma from the Simone Weil House in Portland, Oregon. Why don't you two go ahead, introduce yourself and what your house does.
I'm Bert, and the Simone Weil House, or Simone Weil Catholic Worker, started 6 years ago. We do hospitality. We have something starting in the front yard that we call the second world. So we try to do world building in ways that I think would follow from things from the gospel and Peter Marin and his style.
The new in the shell of the old.
Yeah. Christian economic life, like what we believe about the body of Christ, sort of having organs that can make that tangible. So zero interest lending, working with the credit union, teaching around that, reading books with people, being a house of hospitality. So I think you'll get to these things.
Yeah, and I'm Emma Fitzgerald. I'm Bert's wife. We got married a little over a year ago after meeting here at the house. And I've been at the Catholic Worker now for a little over 5 years. So.
Okay. Well, let's focus on the House of Hospitality angle first. So what is like the overall scope of your project? And how is that being received in Portland? What do you say?
Yeah, so starting with hospitality. So we're a combined house community that, so we have 2 houses across the street from each other, and then 3 tiny houses in the backyard of our main house. Our main house is called the Simone Weil House, and then our second house we usually call Dorothy Day House, although it's sort of combined into one community. And hospitality for us has looked really different over time. We started out obviously as a single house community with no tiny houses, and sure.
Well, it started. You want me to go there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it started with I was living in the house that we're in right now, and there was a chance to sort of reconstitute it, or people wanted to support it, and so people we knew living outside, I just invited them in, a couple, and then there was more, and then we have a double lot, so we ended up putting 3 tiny houses through different relationships. We had people who built them for us in the backyard, so that became hospitality for us. One of them was originally basically a rent-to-own model, where someone on Social Security could build equity, at a level commensurate with that extreme low income, which we. So anyway, and that I think that's sort of the flavor of things that we're really interested in economically. We have then a second house was the second across the street with this hospitality there, but then realized that didn't really work to have so many different centers. So right now, really, and now we're married. So really, hospitality people who are living outside is now the tiny houses in the backyard, and now we look at hospitality, I would say primarily as what we do in the front yard with our commons area, which is like free resources and well, yeah, we could get more into that. How's it been received? I would say really well. There was support from the beginning. I would say the the face of the house that people see the most is our common pantry, common closet, and so on in the front yard, and it brings people to the neighborhood who wouldn't otherwise be there. And so it was like, yeah, how do people feel about that? Amazingly, we don't get complaints. People actually, so I think it goes to show that I think if people don't perceive a sort of tragedy of the commons, where it's like, oh, people take care of this and people respect it, and then we help to facilitate it in a way that allows people to respect it, and then they do respect it more. And so ultimately, it's worked out better than you would think.
And also, I think one of the reasons why what we're doing resonates with people, including like obviously Portland's a very secular city, and so there's even if there's initial skepticism about the fact that we're a faith community in the neighborhood, I think because homelessness, especially coming out of the pandemic time here, feels well, because it is like just such a big, so overwhelming to think about how could you serve, how could you house, how could you respond to the needs of so many people who are living outside. There's just such a palpable sense of despair that can move in all many different directions. And I think a major part of that despair is the sense that the only response that we can have to a problem that is so big has to be at a big scale. Like we have to immediately be thinking about national politics. We have to immediately be thinking about state politics or county politics or even city politics. And people have a sense of, wait, so how can I respond? I'm not a professional, right? There's a sense that the only way to respond is through a process of having credentials to do so. And I think one of the things that obviously the worker models and that we in that tradition try to model is that you can respond as you, sort of like as a human being before another human being. And there's very low barrier ways of doing that, from talking to someone or offering them something that you have an extra of, or bringing something to the commons area here where we accept clothing, books, food, and like small household items. You can bring something here, get to know people who use the space here, come to the second world kiosk for coffee and conversation, get to know your neighbor, build up a relationship. And I think by creating those pathways, people like this, last night we had some people from the neighborhood association came over from the neighborhood, but right before the neighborhood meeting. And you can see that there's a sense of just like relief that like, oh, this is not like so far beyond me that it's me versus the world, but actually something that I can engage with in a direct way. And obviously that's the works of mercy and that's community. Yeah.
Before we get into that, because there's a lot to unpack there too, but just for our listeners, could you kind of describe the part of whereabouts in Portland you are and kind of describe your neighborhood?
We're in inner Northeast Portland, corner of 15th and Emerson, in an area was a historically Black neighborhood, mostly gentrified, beautiful architecture. It's a nice place to be in a lot of ways, and we're a side yard. A corner lot, double lot. So it's like a great place to be in that neighborhood for doing something that's sort of public facing on a household scale. So in a lot of ways, it's really great for what we want to do. And it's not, would say that the center of, it's not where there's a lot of camping in Portland. This is not one of the areas where there's a ton of that. So it's interesting to see how even in this sort of area, there are so many people in need of basic things, so many people who come by our commons area, and like this is how it's like, oh, my husband is diabetic and we wouldn't have money to get proper food for him if it wasn't for this or something. So which is to say, people living outside, people living on the edge, is very common, more common in this area than you would expect. And I think it's that being at that sort of place is helpful for us because we aren't just a house. We don't just emphasize meeting extreme need. We emphasize also like what a household, what a community, what a parish could be. And we'll talk more about that. So being where we are here, I think gives us it's organic for us to have a face both for extreme need and for sort of the gathering of people to kind of live by a different logic together, and not just as it relates to a different group.
And have you seen like your neighborhood shift, like especially after COVID, as like everything has kind of inflated even more? I mean, Portland is kind of famous for its gentrification. Like just in your tenure, have things changed?
Oh, I mean, even just in my few years here, which is almost half, half the time of Bert's, in like my first few years here, we saw multiple, so this is going to sound, multiple sort of affordable single family homes be replaced by duplexes or quadruplexes, but not in a good way, like duplexes or quadruplexes, where any one part of that duplex or quadruplex is worth 3, 4 times what the house was that was on it before. So actually like density, but density as something that actually is exclusive, not actually adding more space to anything. And so we see that both in the lot that's next to Dorothy Day House, as well as on the lot that's next to Simone Weil House. So we're now one of the only houses in this neighborhood that has a double lot where we have our garden, and that used to be something that was very common in this part of Portland, that people would have their double lots to do things like gardening, or the house that is next to Simone Weil House was lived in by multiple generations of a Black family that had been here for decades. But then up against the pressure of the costs of long-term care for like the matriarch of the family, and the fact that that value of that house skyrocketed. They sold that house in order to pay for that long-term care. And then now it's been divided up into multiple units, again, all at much higher cost than the original structure. And so to see here like these, so it very much changes the spirit of the place. And one, you just have fewer places to gather, or fewer ways to have sort of a creative use of one's household space. But also a lot of people who are more transient, who are coming here maybe for tech jobs for a few years, and then moving back to California or moving back to other parts of the country.
Also, that highlights something that a lot of people will say, that that increasing density. Well, that's how we meet the homelessness problem, right? You build more, you build these like $1 million quadruplexes, and we don't think so. Not just because of the on the face of it, the problem with who it's being built for, but yeah, like the viability of a community, and if that means having space to I mean, for us to grow things, to have a tiny house and a kiosk and so on, but we think that's what we think, meeting the social problems underneath homelessness. We think is viability, but not just viability here, viability in other places. Like, we actually don't think it would be good to build more here, so that more people from other communities that are disinvested in could just come here. It's like, no, we should be at our scale and become viable. And the places, let's say the rural places that are becoming unviable for all sorts of different reasons, those should be invested in. Anyway, rather than that, there's the sort of moral logic of the increasing magnetic pull of metropolitan areas.
And could you, sorry if we're getting too into the weeds, but like we're really interested in like what is it like to be kind of like standing against the grain of reinvestment, gentrification, capital accumulation. Like it sounds like you've done a pretty good job of like holding the line, and from the outside it's almost amazing you haven't been like pushed out, because to me I wouldn't think these developers are happy about a second world kiosk of people coming in.
Yeah. So we get well, the fun thing is the kiosk actually looks really cool. So I think you would have to like, okay, this is the dumpy thing in the neighborhood. This is the like weird thing in the neighborhood. So of course we sort of this, oh, this is Portland. Oh, okay, we'd like to think it's better than that. Not just Portland weird, but fine. But no, we do get sometimes the developers going about building some of these things, I think, have looked askance at us, and we got one sort of zoning like complaint from someone who I think anyway,
it was a woman who was looking to sell her house to developers who complained, but there was more context for that, and that sort of after a sort of exchange with someone who worked in the neighborhood had somehow immediately or miraculously disappeared from the city's record as ever having been a complaint. So sometimes we joke that we're going to, fill out the Google Doc and claim that for Dorothy Day's canonization as one of her urban miracles. But yeah, but I think also,
Yeah.
I mean, I think what Bert was saying goes to something that we really emphasize, which is like beauty. Obviously, we're called the Simone Weil House, and one of the things that she, one of her one of the beautiful quotes from her is how beauty is, what is it? Beauty is the thing that pushes you into the labyrinth, at the
Oh,
mouth of the
yeah.
labyrinth of the life of faith. And so recognizing that, and I study Byzantine iconography and do some painting and printmaking, and now a little bit of teaching, and obviously thinking a lot about beauty and order and how beauty allows us to, or can be a pathway for us to encounter God. And I think for us, we take that really seriously, even just in our spaces. I mean, our house is often messy. You can see some signs of that probably in our background, but
That's not mess.
yeah, but curated messiness, but no. But really valuing that, like, yeah, by having the kiosk be something that like we worked with our friends, and it's almost all recycled, reclaimed materials, things like that. But also we put a lot of time into making a border out of old chair legs that looks really cool, just like looks really nice. Like thinking a lot about how do we paint this? Like how do we make this sort of like a place that puts you at ease because of its beauty? And that's something that that obviously Dorothy writes a lot about and cares about, and try one of the things I think that we try to illustrate is that sort of beauty being in something that's nice. Like our Wednesday dinners even recently first started lighting candles on the table during our open Wednesday meals. And so it's like, and we also make candles ourselves, and
We can have one for the podcast,
different vibe. But there's something about like you could just have nice, like sort of like there's nice simple things that make people feel like they're invited into like a warm, beautiful space. And I think that goes a long way with addressing the question that you're talking about. So.
Do you get quite a bit of interaction from the people who live in the immediate area?
Yeah, I mentioned last night, for example, it was the neighborhood association meeting, and the neighborhood association advertises our open Wednesday dinner to come to, like the potluck to come to before the neighborhood association meeting, which is saying a lot about, who at least a few, people in our neighborhood are that have really seen us as like, to use like the coldest possible language, like an asset to the neighborhood sort of. And I think we see that in different ways, like obviously with the free fridge commons area, we used to call it the free fridge. Naming does a lot to change how people interact with it. So the commons area, so there's a lot of people who live outside who we're like one of the major hubs for them. And of course, that's the great thing that people fear if they're homeowners in this neighborhood is that, camping is going to extend to the neighborhood. But I've been just really impressed and grateful that there's been multiple of our neighbors who, instead of viewing when something happens, like when someone ends up sleeping on their property or leaving a mess, or sort of someone's having a mental health crisis of some kind and is shouting, instead of saying, how dare you people sort of like, seeing us as the cause of those problems, actually seeing us as a resource in that way, and actually coming to us and saying, hi, do you have any advice about how to respond to this situation? And that's something that I just really appreciate. And then even in other cases where people have had personal crises, it's like even neighbors we didn't know very well in the midst of personal crisis, like in the middle of the night, came over and knocked on the door. And one of our community members who lives here like came to her aid. And it's not that we even knew this person well, but there's the sense that, oh, if people are responding, like someone can see how we respond to people and say, oh, I'm in a crisis. I don't know anyone in the city. I just moved here. I'm going to go ask them for help. So like, just community benefits all of us. It's not, as Bert was saying earlier. So.
Yeah, and one of the ideas you talk about is being a public household. I feel like that intersects with what you're talking about, because in American life, that's like a contradiction in terms. Like how I feel like most people imagine their household as private. So can you expand more about that?
Yeah, so when I started the house 6 years ago, I wanted that to be the title, Catholic Worker and Public Household, to give like a sort of a more like a particular refraction that would help people of what like the Catholic worker, that would help people to interact with it. And so I know we'll say more about this later, I think, but like, so that would be a very second world thing for us. So do you think, so like development terminology. It's the first world, the third world, and then wait, is there a second world? Well, technically that's former Soviet republics, but no one actually thinks about that. So we'll consider that a blank space, an excluded center. But if you think, like, I mean, we have the problems of opulence, of having too much, but it not being distributed. And of course, the problems of much of the world are just downstream from ours. And the unrooting that comes from our influence. So, but what are more traditional ways to be? I think a key word there would be like integration. A public household is an integrated way I think, points to something that would be part of an integrated society. So a household, and you don't see much of this in the United States, but there are many places, for example, where there would be a house restaurant where you live in the place and then you have some open meals, but it's not like here's a menu of 50 different things. It would be like, this is what we're making for dinner tonight. And so come over, or that's like the tradition of the inn or tavern. So we think that there's something good in itself, having that kind of mixed, hard to define, not like the way that Starbucks is supposedly a third space or whatever that is. Like, no, something that's integrated, not something that not where you're taking advantage of something that sounds like the next thing. So anyway, public household. So we've always wanted to invite people into the house. So if Dorothy Day talking about Christ room hospitality is a way of saying, so to piggyback on something Emma was saying earlier, it's not that like, oh, some people need to solve the homelessness problem over there. It's like, no, the household can be lived in a way that solves that problem, so to speak. Not that we think that way. The parish can think of itself by having a house of hospitality in a way that addresses this. And then just the social organism itself works so as you don't have people falling through the cracks to the same extent. So anyway, a household. We want you to come into our household not as an institution, but to think about what a household can be. And there was a time when we had open household, we call it household hours. Long story short, it didn't work very well because people wanted to help us put it on, but not many people were like, "Oh, I'm going to come into their house or whatever this is going on." So that didn't work really well. So then, but when we started using the word second world more, and the commons area outside, that is where we've been able to really land, I would say, the public household vision. So I don't have a picture right now. Sorry.
Is your takeaway that like inviting people into your household is a little too intimate, but like your front yard is more doable for people? Is that?
Yeah, I would say basically. So some people come into but they typically are people that we first met outside, like in conversation to the kiosk. So there's like that intermediary step. And the way we have set up the commons area, so it's like the closet is the common closet. It says like common closet. It's set up like a closet, like there's the place you can hang things. There are drawers that like, so we would put the shirts in this drawer, put the pants in this drawer. So which is to say, like it has the non-institutional sort of home-like quality, even as it's out front and public, so to speak. So I think, anyway, so this has been, I would say, the good way for us to land.
Yeah, and I think part of that too is even when we were setting up the commons area, sort of intentionally making it look sort of like a little kitchen next to a little closet next to like your bookshelf. So it's like all like interior furniture that we filled that space with. That also contributes to the sense that sort of you're in a house even as you're outside, and sort of really thinking about the yard in that way. And I think that's also one of the ways when we were envisioning how Second World would work, even by having sort of like a name for it. And we have these sort of like museum style signs out in the front yard that sort of say some sort of mysterious things about how to engage with the space. And I wanting it to feel sort of like almost like sort of a theatrical experiment, sort of like you're coming into a space and you're actually like taking on a role that is not the normal one, and the world has a completely different set of rules. Like for our opening event for that, we did sort of an Alice in Wonderland themed skit. It's sort of like you're through the rabbit hole, and now it's sort of like you've come out on the other side and things aren't what they seem. And so how can you create a space? And like Bert was saying earlier, Portland culturally has some bandwidth for, strange things. And so people are like, yeah, okay, like let's try to play with this and see how it feels. And oh yeah, I'm okay, come and feel something strange. Like you're kind of playing a part by coming up and going to this very informal coffee shop to get your cup of coffee that you don't necessarily have to pay anything for. And that feels really strange and uncomfortable. But if you talk about it in this sort of like playful, sort of whimsical way, it can actually be an entryway into a way of being that we actually think is more fundamental, not extraneous. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Are there pictures on your website of what the front looks like? I looked at the
Yeah.
website quite a bit. I didn't run across that, but yeah, okay, good, because
Yeah.
maybe we can
Yeah,
share all that.
I
Yeah.
texted Spencer some photos, which I could just forward to you, or you guys could forward them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll put the links in the show notes for people that want to see this stuff.
Mhm.
So you have your household, you have the second world space, and then what other aspects of this house do you guys manage?
So like, yeah, but living, so that's like, what else do we do? It's like, well, living communion, where that comes from.
Well, yeah, so you gave the backstory about how Living Communion started. I think that was but anyway, so yeah, as Bart was saying, so credit unions started in North America in immigrant Catholic parishes with people didn't have access to mainstream financial institutions, in the sense that actually when a community can't turn to these larger scale institutions to meet its need, you're actually creatively forced to meet your own needs within your community. And that's something that we took a lot of inspiration from. And as we were looking at models for how to, well, obviously, modern credit unions, they operate a lot like banks. Like, you don't get the sense that even if they started as the expression of a community, I mean, the credit unions are good things. It's good to put your money sort of in a nonprofit, banking institution, but you don't really get the sense that you're actually members of a body, that you're actually members of a credit union in the way that we think about being, for example, members of the body of Christ, or members in any sort of community that we actually have a relational commitment to. And so one to think about, how could we revive something like the old school credit union, where it actually, your banking, your lending was an expression of your community life. And NDFCU basically allowed us to create a project where communities, parishes, schools could form themselves sort of subsidiary credit unions within the larger credit union of NDFCU, where they could have all the benefits of like using NDFCU's online banking and debit and credit cards and the sorts of things that now Catholic, of course, parish credit unions still exist, but most of them only do savings accounts, for example, because the cost of like the infrastructure for having a full-fledged credit union is just, too high. And so by organizing ourselves as subsidiary credit unions within a larger one, you're able to have those same benefits while actually creating or forming or enlivening sort of real relational dynamics. And as we were thinking about how that would work, we reached out to a couple of different groups, including like St. Vincent de Paul societies, some of which run micro lending programs, and they do really, good work serving people who, obviously wouldn't otherwise have access to credit, but saw that they have very low repayment rates. And so it's kind of more or less a grant, but then some people pay it back. And that's kind of how it works. And that's how they expect it to work. Versus we talked to people that we got to know at the Hebrew Free Loan Society of New York, and they were so generous with their time and talking about how their model works, where they have over a 99% repayment rate because they use something called a guarantor system, where instead of like other sort of microloan programs where loans are backed by a fund as collateral, that's sort of impersonal, even though it is an expression of the community and that's a good thing, but it's impersonal. The Hebrew Free Loan Society, and using their guarantor model, we were really struck by like really the Christological logic that sort of, by saying that I'm willing to be a guarantor for your loan, and I'm willing to be on the line should your loan default, that there's actually something there that really is in the pattern, of Christ's self-offering, and I'm giving people an opportunity to participate in that, while still having the benefits of the community structure where, I'm going to say, even if someone were to default on the loan, like this community is not actually going to let one person be on the line for that whole amount. So even though one person has to embrace all of that precarity sort of and responsibility in a legal sense, they're still backed by the relational dynamic of the community that is, going to have their backs too, in this sort of chain of support. And so since we started, and so originally we wanted to do this at our local Roman Catholic parish, but the priest perhaps reasonably said, how about I want to see this work somewhere else first, and then so we decided then to pilot it here at the house, always knowing that we really thought that this project, its sort of most proper home would be in a parish, because you're actually, celebrating the liturgy. You're being formed as the body of Christ by the liturgy, not in a Catholic worker community. But nonetheless, since we started gathering people around this, I don't know how many loans we've actually done, but some of the stories just are really moving, including, a man who was in a car accident who was so nervous, at the hospital, they were, hounding him about paying his medical bills. He was so nervous about that, even though he probably would have qualified for some sort of financial assistance, that he opened up a credit card offer he got in the mail and paid for his medical bills that way at 38% interest. So now all of a sudden, this wasn't medical debt, couldn't be resolved along the ways that, medical debt has special protections for how to resolve. So he was just buried in that. And he was introduced to us by a Catholic worker who is here, who was doing some volunteering at one of the local parishes just a few blocks from us. So it connected us with him, and we were able to basically refinance that debt at 0% interest, guaranteed by, someone who knew him. Or another woman who, all sorts of stories. Another woman who, had been homeless. She got a job working in her previous industry, but she needed a car to get that job. But she had her credit history was wasn't good. But, as a community, we knew her. And so we were able to say, yeah, we are going to make this loan on the basis of trust, and find someone who's willing to really, sort of entrust themselves in that way by being a guarantor of that loan. And, she's paid it off and it's been great. And, yeah, so really appreciate, and so even as I'm emphasizing these sort of examples of more precarity, one of the ways that we also talk about this, especially in a parish, is that this isn't just sort of, an outreach. I mean, there's reasons for outreach programs, but this isn't primarily that. We want people to be able to see themselves as like, this is just how you bank. This is a good for everyone. Interest hurts everyone, actually. It presumes the logic of infinite growth, and that's not good. It's not good that if you need to take out a loan to fix your car, that the whole banking system presumes you're going to make more money because you fixed your car in order to keep your job. It's just this logic that doesn't make any sense. And so trying to invite people, not just people sort of in extreme need, but also people who need credit for any sort of other reason, to see them like, this is just how we bank because it makes a better world for all of us. So is that
so yeah, there's something we've always taken inspiration from, and we'll use to help people to introduce the feeling of what we're inviting our community to do and inviting other communities to do, is It's a Wonderful Life. The movie as a whole, but especially if you remember the bank run scene, what happens there. So the mainstream, the financial, what you thought about what was happening to your money, all of a sudden, nope, it's not happening. So Jimmy Stewart shows up at the Building and Loan, which is the credit union, and the whole community is gathered there. So that's one interesting thing. It's not the community, the bank. It's like, well, all the people are here, and so maybe to step back for a moment, one thing we learn from that is maybe community banking means that like the community, it should feel like a community, like a parish does. All the people would meet in one space. So the people are there, and people like sort of being invested in each other in this general way. But now all of a sudden the market is saying, well, all of that is being called. What you thought was happening isn't happening. And moreover, you need to try to get out with what you can. And so met with that crisis, even though people were in this good structure, it was crumbling, and people are like, okay, we're going to have to do what the other banks are doing, close or accept old man Potter's offer of 50 cents on the dollar, and then he owns it, not the community anymore. And at first, Jimmy Stewart didn't have any. It's like, well, no, don't do this. This is good. They're like, but it doesn't work. It's gone. But then his wife's like, here's our honeymoon money, and they're like, oh yeah. And then when he's able to pay, even though that wasn't very much relative to all of that, by totally giving what they had, then everyone else was willing to be like, oh, okay, so that's what's happening. Okay, I will follow and train with that and take only what I need. And then everyone's stake in each other, and that was financial, that was the homes that were being invested in by the model of that credit union. All of that was able to be saved because of that Christ-like action that then everyone else was be able to follow. So we like to say that, like, okay, maybe the credit union at baseline, you don't have to think of it that way. But what if we did have to think of it that way? And to refound the credit union, basically with like the way that we're talking about here, like zero interest, actually having skin in the game with each other, really ground up. Let's like we believe that the body of Christ is the real way, that is the real logic of the world that our resources should be in. So like, let's redo this. But that means really going into the Christological character of it. Not that we're all being, but like we can at least be the follower who's like, oh yeah, that I can pay, I can explicitly put my skin in the game, instead of just seeing that as a sort of like bug in the system that supposedly there's some risk and maybe we'll all come crashing down. Hopefully it doesn't, but no, here that risk is mediated by like real relationships. And anyway, so I mean, beautiful things that are part of the way this has happened here is like so there's a committee that determines like does this loan work? You get to know the person. It's like you fill out a loan repayment sheet having to do with finances, have vulnerable conversations, and then with the guarantor, there's like a real conversation. Well, we host a meal, a borrower guarantor meal, where we can talk about things and get to know each other. And so anyway, this entrustment is all like wrapped in relationship, and it's beautiful to see like how that works. It's not efficient, but then again, what else are we supposed to be doing with our time? Like this is the stuff of life. If we had automatic mechanisms to do this, like, well, then what would we do? I mean, our houses run by themselves now, right? Too. So what are we supposed to do with our time? We think that we should. Well, one of the things is we should be really doing this economy relationally.
So that sounds like it takes up quite a bit of time. And so like before we move on, like I'd just like to know, yeah, how much of your time is taken up doing that particular thing? And also you mentioned that the parish was kind of like, well, let's see you do it first, or let's see somebody else do it. So what is your relationship with the parish now that you've kind of shown that it can be done and that it is working?
Yeah. We'll answer the second question first. And I guess second question would be that alongside trying to start, with the parish here in Portland, we'd also reached out to a parish that Bert knew from his time in South Bend, where he was also in the Catholic Worker in South Bend before moving to Portland. And also there's something natural because NDFC is actually based in South Bend. So even though they are a national credit union. And so actually there's a parish in South Bend now that's adopted this practice. So that was actually the first parish community, as well as ones being sort of onboarded in hopefully in Steubenville. And so in this spring, we're hoping to actually have a cohort of parishes or other church communities that sort of enter into this project together.
Can I interject here? Yeah. So that's something that we want people to know about. We've developed all the training, context, the theological. We developed like an online class with Notre Dame's McGrath Institute. We piloted to like, so we're going to like make that available again and basically work with parishes, schools, Christian communities. We have some events lined up now, but especially in the new year. So that takes up time because there's the layer of this community, and then we want other communities to do this. It's sort of like we said with housing. It's like we don't think that we should be solving the problem. We want to do a little bit of it and then help other people to have that sense of ability. So anyway, so that's how this will work. And that, but anyway, back to what you were saying.
Oh, that was.
Hillary, I'm not sure if I answered both parts of your question. Or
did you ever like get your local parish to kind of come back in and participate?
Oh yeah, not yet, but we hope. But anyway, so now that we're really making this doing this emphasis, because I guess we like realizing like how much work it is to onboard particular communities, or like, oh, I think it will make sense to kind of have a group of communities doing this together, so that some of that so the context is helpful and not just a relationship like with us. So there's openness there. Holy Redeemer Parish. So we hope Holy Redeemer wants to do it. Yeah.
No pressure.
The pastor was made a bishop. So right when it was so he's in.
So he has even more pull somewhere.
Yeah. So now it's like, okay, well, new relationships. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what if we shift gears just a little bit? So let's talk about how you interact with we've been begging the question that you have a community, but mostly we've talked about you two. Can you talk about your community within Vey House, and then also like what your integration with parish life looks like? I mean, we've covered the co-op thing, but let's talk about how you're received otherwise.
Yeah. So right now, so as a community, so it's us, and then we have, usually anywhere from like 1 to 2 other sort of like full-time Catholic workers who join us. And we have our longstanding, so the way that we do live in hospitality is like most Catholic workers are completely open-ended. And so people stay with us sort of as long as it makes sense. And we also think that obviously community is a good thing for everyone, sort of one of the things we keep coming back to. And so not necessarily that this is a place to move on from if it's something that is, we think it's a good place to be. So our community, as right now so the things that we share as a community, I should say, I guess, would be we have a community meal every week and a house meeting, and then also an open meal that as a community sort of we host neighbors and anyone who wants to come to the open community meal. And we also share, one of the things we started a couple of years ago when we put in our garden is starting to share a lot more manual work. And one of the reasons that came about was different things, like recognizing, one, that we had sort of a big sort of eruption in the life of the community. We were a lot bigger at the time. We had we're 13 people across 2 houses, and including having inviting some people to tent camp in the backyard. And had an incident where sort of basically a couple of people relapsed in drug use at the same time, and it led to sort of a big sort of implosion in community life. And one of the things that we reflected on in that was that, well, because people sort of all doing their own thing, we had this, house meal and house meeting, but we weren't actually working together very much. And so then we didn't really recognize what was going on until sort of it really imploded and didn't intervene sooner. And so one of the things that we took from that, and also, of course, it's part of the Catholic worker ethos, is just the importance of having shared work. And a lot of the people who come to live with us long term tend to be men who worked manual labor jobs for most of their lives and then got injured for some reason, and then now in some way and now can't work in the ways that they're used to. And it was part of Catholic social teaching, part of the worker, part of just a sense of what it means to be human is the importance of work, of having, contributing to the world in a meaningful way, doing things with your hands. And so out of that, we started, gardening together. We make sourdough bread a couple times a week, different people in the community, yogurt, cooking, also making, we have a basement candle making studio, making cards. We now also cultivate worms for, worm casings. For like compost tea for plants. And so a lot of our community life looks like, and also, of course, tending to the commons area. We have, multiple shifts a day where everyone in the community has, a couple of shifts a week for cleaning that area. If we have donations inside the house, bringing those out, talking to people, staffing the kiosk. And so basically just our household life is a lot more busy. And so it involves a lot more, shared work with one another. And so those are the things that we all share.
For the intentional community, the also praying some of the liturgy of the hours. So matins, most people do that at 6:30 in the morning, and we have a midday prayer at 12:30. After our open meal, we pray Compline too. So yeah, I think the liturgical emphasis, like even in the economic project, we have figure that in terms of the liturgy, like the body of Christ, if the liturgy is the source and the summit of that, what's the rest of it look like? Like, what are the contours of a life that are formed by that? So in one sense, it's like, how does it form us as an economic body? But in another sense, what's the continuing liturgy of life, and how can we be sense that we're part of that? We like the line, I forget, it might be Schneemann originally, but the liturgical circulation of the cosmos.
It's Fagerberg.
Is it? Oh, that's
yeah.
Fagerberg. Okay. So anyway, we like cosmological language. We think we're a microcosm of just the way that, or we want to be a microcosm of the kingdom. And so, yeah, a liturgical life is part of that as well.
And then hopefully this doesn't take us too far aside, but you mentioned Schneemann, who's an Orthodox theologian, and you mentioned the interest in Byzantine iconography. And then I feel like I have this memory when we were talking at the Morin conference that you guys did a honeymoon, I think in Romania.
Yeah.
Interest in
Yeah.
like basically Eastern Christianity and a more like integrated, like a Christianity that hasn't been blown apart by liberalism, basically. My words, not yours.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I guess could you guys talk a bit more about your interest in that?
Yeah. So yeah, we just start with so we were married in the as in Byzantine Catholic service, so which they use the Eastern, of course, Eastern Christianity is mostly Orthodox, like the words you would associate with that, a divine liturgy, rite of crowning is like is the marriage rite. So that's what we did. And before that, I asked an Orthodox theologian whose book I appreciate, The Ethics of Beauty. Um, like if you were to use your honeymoon to experience like deeply enculturated Eastern Christianity, where would you go? And he said, Romania. Here, I'll introduce you to somebody. So, so that's how I ended up in Romania. I would say, yeah, with let's say the background of the sensibilities that we've talked about, um, in terms of like our economic project, the second world, Romania is so second world. So it's like, wait, how do they do it here? Well, I mean, obviously, not to romanticize its actual history, very, very difficult modern history with the domination of the Soviet Union, et cetera, et cetera. So in actually experiencing fragmentation the way other countries are. But there are beautiful things there. So anyway, that was the background. So we spent time in monasteries, which was very beautiful, and we wanted to understand more of like village life. So our commons area, like our sign actually says Village Commons. Um, so anyway, we're very interested in getting to know for people who aren't reclaiming something or trying to or reading a book, and like what's it like for the communities that are just doing these things without thinking about it. So that was some of our hope, and what's the Eastern inflection of that. I wouldn't say that's mostly what we met. We more met the cool stuff in monasteries, because the village life is mostly is lost for a large extent, and the rest of it, it's really hard for an American to peer into that. And interesting, so I'd say part of something that ties these threads together too is there's a very interesting book called Cosmos, Life, and Liturgy in a Greek Orthodox Village. Um, Aptly titled. It really gives you a sense that these things are tied together, sort of like in the Jewish world, which we think like, oh, okay, so this is a sort of like sense of the unity of life that people experienced like thousands of years ago, and now we're like so many layers removed from that. Where it's like, the agricultural feasts, the religious feasts, it's the same thing, and then like messianic expectation, the sense of who God is, all is they're mutually figured. And we do things that aren't just sort of like rituals that refer to that at a few levels of removed. No, you might for that. So anyway, like a particular thing we were inspired to do was for the feast of the Dormition / Assumption. It's like a harvest time, so the wheat grown. So they would grow wheat in this village, and then the wheat would be coming in from the field at the same time that new bread is coming out. And at the edge of the town, they'd celebrate a liturgy and I'm not remembering all the pieces here, but that part really stuck with us. So we actually now grow wheat in our front yard, so we can make communion bread and also a normal bread. I give that example to say that sort of enculturated Eastern Christianity, like we think that um, there's a lot to retrieve, but not just the aesthetic, like the iconographic things that Emma can talk to, but also the traditions of like what did it mean to be Christian in a more integrated way, and we think like the Eastern Church has a lot to teach us.
Yeah, and Emma, did you want to say anything about like iconography and how that slots into everything you're doing?
Yeah, I'd say different thing. Yeah, that one of the things I say the theology of the icon is that the icons and relics are very closely related. That instead of iconography being sort of pedagogical religious art that, sort of like a picture book that teaches us about salvation history, instead iconography. That sort of the saint is actually somehow mysteriously present in his image, the same way that if we think about the language of that we are made in the image of God, the basics, that actually has some force to it, and that the history of icons coming out of the fact that, the emperor in ancient times would have an image of himself before sort of important meetings that could actually stand sort of in place of his person, and that icons have some of that same quality, that the saint is actually mysteriously present in his or her image, and on that sense that we can participate, that we can both in the process of writing an icon, but also in the process of praying with icons, that actually the spiritual, that which is really real, is actually really present to us right here and now, in the world, as we're living in it. And icons remind us of that. So
one of the things that I think kind of runs across different, village or peasant ways of living is these times during the year when everybody just kind of knows that they're supposed to do something to help each other collectively, whether it's like back in, more in southern France, it was, okay, now it's time to herd all the sheep over to, these mountainous places. And everybody took part in that. And there was this rhythm. I don't think anybody actually, there was no like contract or anything. Just people knew what to do, right? Here in Kansas, a few generations ago, people were still helping each other with harvest, and it was the same sort of thing. They just sort of knew, okay, now, every year we go to this person's farm first, right? And the people at that place like cook dinner for everybody, and they stay there until the job's done, and then everybody moves on to the next place. I've had people explain this to me who are still alive, who remember that, even here in the United States. And so, I mean, that seems like something to get back somehow. I know the Amish, for instance, they do this. I think it's the Amish. They have this cleaning period where everybody goes to each other's homes in a pattern, and everybody's house gets totally aired out, clean, put back. It sounds to me like you've got some of that type of thing going on. Is there anything like that you're promoting there, in the way of just, kind of trying to, this is the season of the year, and now we're doing this, and we're going to try to do it together?
yeah, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. Well, one example from life here, and then I guess one community that we take inspiration from. So I guess two-part answer. The first is, as Bert was saying, we grew wheat here. I mean, of course, wheat's a good cover crop generally. And then also it's when we celebrate, try to have masses celebrated here at the house by local priests, like once a month. And so making the communion bread for that, the Eucharistic prayer is the work of human hands. And so really, being able to invite people into that in a different, in a deeper way in the liturgy here was something very important to us. But we were, and also the virtue of having the Second World Commons, we were threshing wheat that we had grown in the yard outside and in the front yard space. And someone walked by, and this wasn't me, this was one of our other Catholic workers, Halia. A woman walked by and said, oh, sort of like asked, like, are you threshing wheat? She goes, I used to do that all the time in Guatemala. Let me show you how it's really done. Because we were doing it based off of like YouTube videos. And so then she sat down and joined us for a few hours of threshing wheat, and, multiple people from the community were involved in the front yard. And
she joined us for midday prayer.
Yeah, and joined us for prayer. And so it's, doing weird things in the front yard as its virtues. And so that's one example of just how doing something created more of that spirit. But then also a community that we are really inspired by. There's a Catholic worker community in Lafayette, Louisiana. They don't have a Catholic worker house, but they have a community of families who are sort of inspired by the worker and wanting to live parts of the workers' Vision Peter's program. One of the things they do is they have these rotating work parties, where basically like every month for one weekend, they go to one person's house and basically do the project that's needed, that like many hands may like work around. And so that's something that as we revive our in-person community around the Redemptive Lending Project, Living Communion, and we're always emphasizing how the pattern of mutuality, of self-offering that is evident in that lending mechanism that we talked about should set the pattern for other parts of life the same as well. And so we're hoping, so we're always trying to talk about different practices of mutuality that can thicken that sort of experience of community life. And so it's one thing that we want to go to doing here as that same sort of rotating work party model.
Yeah, and if I might, just a couple of reflections on that we think about the not just how to instantiate, but the significance of the type of pattern that you're talking about in those traditional communities. One thing that comes to mind, we're reading Simone Weil's The Need for Roots right now. She talks about how there are different needs of the soul, and they're different. And you don't find when there is like two that are, let's say, like order and liberty or something, that are that seem to pull in different directions. You don't find like a middle ground between them. You meet one need and then another need, just like a human being. It's like, oh, I'm not going to sleep, eat, and I'm not going to find a place to be sort of have a steady drip of all these things. Like, no. Oh, what's going on now is I'm tired. I need to sleep. Oh, okay, then it's mealtime. And in the life of the community, our communities are sort of disintegrated enough that we can't have that organic sense for like, oh, now we would go to this person's farm. Okay, and then this, and then it's this season. So we would be able to feel that. And like we think a lot about economic history, that like supposedly, the econometrically described economy we have now. One of the big steps was so-called rationalizing the economy, and that meant rationalizing the labor force. So there are always people who will flow to what needs to happen, but that had to go through sort of basically proletariatizing those people, like taking them away from their roots, their organic functions in community, and sort of being like, okay, we're unemployed unless we go to like where the seasonal jobs or the factory jobs are now. So, and that was like a so-called rationalizing, so making more predictable the large scale economy. And of course, but that's at this cost of the disintegration of these sort of things. And we think that the real rationality is that rationality, the rationality of a living organism, just like we think we attribute rationality to ourselves as living beings. Hopefully more so than computers, though that's another thing. Like, what is the standard of rationality? Organisms have their own rationality too. And what you were just saying is an example of it. And we're lost, like we're irrational now. I think that the Christian rationality, and of course Christ, offers like the rational sacrifice. So what is that? So anyway, I think rationalizing our communities means reinvesting in these organic patterns.
I love it. And it's just tragic that it hasn't been that long since these things seem to be destroyed. So anything that we can do to kind of bring that sensibility back so that people can see each other as their actual neighbors, human beings, valuable in many respects, including helping each other. That, that is amazing. It's been really cool to hear about the credit union in particular. Thank you for talking about that quite a bit. I think my experience with credit unions has been, it's just like a bank, right? So that description that you gave of it being able to turn into a human process again is really, really lovely. I don't know if you guys wanted to say any more about, so this lingering question that I have in my head is like, first of all, how do you do all this? And is this like your main job, so to speak? I hate to use those terms, but like, do you have to work outside of the home and the other things that you're doing? Or are you able to kind of maintain yourself and, how do you do it as the two of you? How do you balance it all?
The long story short would be, the community is supported entirely by donations, and there's a nonprofit that people could donate to there.
Which, of course, like the story behind that is in part the person who owns our house said we could turn into it because we rent both of our houses. The person who owns our main house said that basically we could turn into a Catholic worker, Bert could turn into a Catholic worker if we started a nonprofit. That was his one requirement. So against the Catholic worker spirit, but I mean, without it, we wouldn't. Without that is the structure that also allows us to do this credit union project. So
because it needs an anchor nonprofit. So it's helped us out. But then we each get like a very small stipend from that. So the basic answer is, we're supported by, the fact that a lot is provided for by what is in common here, small stipend. Emma does teaching iconography outside, but that's not a whole lot of money. So yeah, and so intentional poverty is of course something that we're familiar with in this movement, and it's something that we try to live um, to go to and we think is like really important even specifically in the projects that we talked about. So for example, like credit union, like so what if the credit union was organized the way that we think it should be, like a community of communities, of subsidiary communities, where loan isn't or interest isn't charged for loans, then people wouldn't be able to be making much money who are behind the scenes in that, would they? And so, long story short, we think that to have the society that we think we should have, there need to be people living in intergenerational poverty. Sorry. Oh, wow. That was quite a misspeak.
Yeah.
Well, no, we don't think that's true. Intentional poverty and intergenerational are obviously quite distinct and opposed. So, I mean, just like, you could have, Catholic schools you didn't have to pay for because there were these religious who,
Yeah.
anyway, so we believe in an economic model that where people play this role so that the organizers are not the people benefiting the most from it, but the organizers of these things are actually people who are saying, I could do without benefiting from this. And community, you recognize that sacrifice and you're willing to sort of supply our basic needs, but then the community can have this so that the community's functions can be for their own sake and not for the sake of the people who manage to organize the organizers and to be at the top of the pyramid. So anyway.
Yeah. And I would say also in terms of like the first part of your question of like how we do this stuff, like the we that sort of we keep using is, of course, we're the coordinators of the community part. We've been here the longest and have sort of the most stable commitment. But the we is also many other people, like I said, the other people, I mean, who live here, who help to like make the common space, like man the kiosk in a way that we can't do just ourselves. Like our like the redemptive lending, living communion project that we've talked about has many other people in its steering committee, both local friends, and then also one of the fun things about the class we taught was called Liturgy and Communion Economy. Some of the people that we work now closest with are people, I mean, it's both like the beauty and the perils of the modern age are people that we have not met in person because we met them through that class. And like we have this, reading group that we meet with every Thursday on Zoom and that started during the pandemic that's been going for a few years, and people who've committed to that every Thursday for now several years. Who've helped us, who've been the people we think with in that. So say this mysterious we is bigger than what you see on the screen. So yeah.
And would it be fair to say that, like, Bert, while you were talking, like the image of the Eucharist came to mind, that I take your argument to be that we've embraced voluntary poverty and sort of on the basis of that sacrifice. Not that clearly not you aren't the only one sacrificing, but I think the bitter pill that modern American liberal people don't want to swallow is that to do anything like spiritually worthwhile, there's some kind of sacrifice that has to be baked into the cake. And it's on the basis of that sacrifice, like love can radiate out and invites other people to share in that sacrifice. Would that be a fair summary of?
Yeah. And I think what the one It's a Wonderful Life example that we give has been our sort of exhibit A to draw that out in a story that's really well told and easy to quickly like emotionally come to grips with. But yeah, like the real story there is the story of God in salvation history. Like what if this is what God is all the way through? Like that Simone Weil has a line that God plus creation is less than God, which is to say that in creating, God lets go of control. Like there are beings that are now not God. And then what is the being that can be the most not like God? Really? Human beings, because we can rebel explicitly. And so anyway, so that's like being the creator or the organizer or whatever, all these roles, insofar as they in some way are analogous to like what we believe about God, all of that is like a letting go and an impoverishing, but that impoverishing is the condition for love. And obviously, so this is like the great mystery. And so we're like our lives certainly do not reflect that, but that's what we we want for ourselves, and we want society to be able to reflect this. And we don't think that there's actually another way. I think it just doesn't work.
Mhm. And what would you say to people that are feeling a pull, and maybe at the beginning, I would imagine the average American, they can imagine, okay, I could have a clothing closet in my front yard and a food pantry, but they can't imagine running a credit union or sharing a house with a bunch of people, or how this all intersects with their faith life. What would you say to people that feel a draw, but like they're too trapped in rationalistic irrationality? Um,
Well, my stab at that would be that like one of the things that we try to emphasize in the work that we do, whether it's hospitality or the credit union or, the commons area, is like to start with communities that you're already part of. Like you don't have to create a new community to do any of these things. It's thinking about you exist in a web of relationships. What are those relationships? How could more depth or like sort of like thickness be added to those relationships? How could you, I mean, of course, there's small things you could say, the difference between ordering an Uber to the airport or asking your friend to drive you to the airport. Right? It's sort of like we create these relationships sort of positive indebtedness that actually allow our relationships to become thicker and more alive, and more responsive to need. And so, yes, I would say start with the communities that you're already part of, and think about just what are the dimensions of real vulnerability as well as real self-offering that can be added to that sort of reflect the reality of that relationship.
Yeah, and specifically to what you were saying, Spencer, yeah, I think I mean, I think it would be wrong actually for someone to think like, oh, all of these good things that I saw someone else did, whoa, I should do them all right now. And if that feels overwhelming, then that means, okay, then maybe Christianity's too hard or something like that. But then no one can do all of these things. Like we don't, I mean, we only have to do any of these things ourselves. And this is our job. So I mean, yeah, so you start with one thing. I mean, Wendell Berry has some famous quote, I think, where it's like, he's, painted this beautiful picture of integrated life and society. And it's like, well, I'm not a part of any of this. Where do I start? I said, well, connect two things you think should go together, just connect them. Like that's be an example. So like, yeah, but when you're part of a community, and you just don't recognize it because it doesn't feel that way. You put a little bit more into that and say, okay, well, I've got the clothing closet here. Like this is the community, like let's do this. And okay, then there's a positive feedback loop where there's some energy that comes from seeing the way that this works in some way. In some way, this gets at something that we believe is true, that before we thought maybe you can't actually live that, or that's for other people. Do that, then maybe there's another thing, and maybe someone else holds that. But yeah, we believe that the organism is real. Like the body of Christ is alive at the local scale. Like your parish is the body of Christ. It's not a little fraction of it. So it's like we can come to understand that, but we have to come to have small experiences of that in order to set ourselves up to have any larger ones. And the largeness of it, of course, will always be disappointing. It'll probably always have the character, it certainly does for us, of like, oh, what if we just did a little bit? Or what if we what if we actually just did any one thing right?
Do we want to talk about your experience as Benedictine Oblates?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, there wasn't a reason not to.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm curious.
the Mount Angel. So, well, I mean, to start in the background, Dorothy Day was a Benedictine oblate of St. Procopius in Chicago. Interestingly, St. Procopius is one of its charisms was the East-West relationship, and I actually took some retreats there. I don't think that's still alive as part of what they do, but yeah. So we're an hour away from Mount Angel, a Benedictine abbey, and they've been very nice to us, allowing us to sort of retreat there for free or for vastly reduced cost, and and yeah, being able to experience their integration of life, let's say like the liturgy, um, always it obviously in Christianity as a whole, in the Catholic worker movement, and then in our own lives, we have that sense of like, oh, there's a compactness to this microcosm of the world and of life that you see that is most evident when you're in a monastery. And then you take that out, and Peter Marin says, bring monasticism out of the monasteries. So we take some aspects of what we do to be that. Like we try to live a semi-monastic life, as one might put it. So oblate, so sort of like anyway, the Franciscans have like a third order. For the Benedictines, being an oblate, it's like you're connected to a particular monastery. It's not like you're a pan-Benedictine oblate. So that's an interesting like connection to place and to like particular relationships too.
And also there's a line from the Rule of St. Benedict, which describes the monastery as a school of the Lord's service. And thinking about, Dorothy's writings, talking about what is the Catholic worker. At one point, she says, it's a school, it's this, it's that, sort of, it's a school in how to be in the world. And I think that that's one thing that we draw a lot of inspiration from, sort of like, what are we trying to do? In some sense, like, we're trying to figure it out. That's what we're trying to do, like trying to figure out, like, how do we live the gospel? How do we live as Christians? And one of the things that I think having Simone Weil as our patron tends to do is it brings in, I think the worker as a whole does this, but perhaps particularly because of Simone Weil, a lot of people who are just exploring the faith or sort of don't have like contact with it before, but have like a deep pull and desire for faith. And so almost all of our Catholic workers who have been here entered as like non-Christians or, non-practicing Christians, and then or in the process of entering the church or have entered the church. And so I think that there's something there of like that. What are we trying to do? We're trying to figure out how to be gods, how to do that. And one of the fun things about Mount Angel too specifically is actually Dorothy used to visit Mount Angel. So she has several pieces in the old Catholic worker papers about her visits to Mount Angel and how inspired she was by specifically the cooperative industries that developed around the monasteries that the monastery supported and sort of helped to be possible. That doesn't exist now for reasons that have to do with tax law and all of these things about how monasteries can't have multiple sources of earned income, and so they can have passive income. So they have the seminary, which is their earned income. So anyway, so all these ways that tax law again sort of like shapes even religious life, but seeing there that this rhythm of prayer and work being a school of the Lord's service like has an economic dimension, and that if we look to our monasteries, there's both not just industries within the monastery, whether they make candles or fruitcake or whatever it is, but also that there used to be this, and in some cases still is, this cooperative economic life that surrounds it, that is in some sense the fruit of that religious life.
And this is Peter Marin's Green Revolution, by the way. It's like how monastery, like in one sense, it's how the monastery should be the heart of Christian communities, and the way he saw Irish monks who traveled east, what they were able to add there. And anyway, yeah, we think it's really fun that Dorothy Day essentially found that here in Oregon around Mount Angel.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and one of the standout things from everything you guys have been talking about is how much you're like part of, I guess I would argue, like part of the wider Catholic like ressourcement movement. That so much of what you're doing, you're going back to the sources, whether it's Eastern Christianity, iconography, monasticism. And I feel I have a pet theory, I guess, if you guys want to comment on it, that like we're part of what you could arguably call like the third wave of Catholic workerhood, where it is less stereotypical, just straightforward houses of hospitality, protesting, resisting the war state. And it's more, how do we get back to the deep roots of our Christianity, and how do we like live that out in radically experimental ways? Would you guys agree with that? Disagree?
Oh yeah, I would love to come out of that. First, yeah. So I have a positive association with ressourcement, but I think it's even more fundamental to talk about it as recapitulatory, like Christ. That's essentially what Christianity is, because it's what Christ is. Like we believe that Christ is the new Adam. It's like in Adam we're human, but we're also fallen, and there's like a corporate personhood to Adam. That it's like Christ is the new corporate person, and he went through sort of the thickness of history and of the history of sin and falling away from God, and remade us in the image of the new man. And we can refract that out to all sorts of different institutions, like the church is real, recapitulates Israel. Anyway, we believe that in Christ we should be recapitulating social form. So like, what is the credit union? Well, what what is sort of like Christ, well, in the beginning it was not so. And you'll say, like, this is how Adam and Eve were. Well, in the beginning, the credit union was not so. It was not a bank. Okay, we have to recapitulate it. Not that there's a perfection at the root of any human organization, but we believe as Christians and Catholic workers is just like can just make that potentially even more explicit. Like what is a household? What does it mean to be Christian? Like all these things. Well, we go back to the source, not because the source is perfect when it comes to the human stuff, but because it's the process of becoming that rigid. It's not that we get to go somewhere. And this is why, Simone Weil says that one of the great illusions of modernity is progress. You can't go upwards. Like you can go forwards, but going forwards is just staying on the same plane. That we're always trying to we're trying to become what we are. I mean, as Augustine said of the Eucharist, become what you are. We're just trying to become Christian, and that means going through the thickness of. So it's like, what is Christ's relationship with the law? In a sense, we have to go through that. We have to go through redemption in a material level to understand it at a spiritual level. I mean, Christ was, of course, connecting, spiritual salvation, healing. Luke chapter 4, his inaugural sermon. What is it like? The oppressed, giving sight to the blind, etc. All of these things are connected, and we think. The word recapitulation, I think, gets to that at the most fundamental level. The ressourcement, I love it, and I just want to make sure that we don't. Anyway, the way that we're because I totally agree with what you said, and I just wanted to make it feel like, no, this is the thing. It's not just our way of doing it.
I appreciate that, especially that, and I think we're reading the Deep Roots now at both our Wednesday dinners as sort of our clarification of thought and with our Zoom reading group. One of the things I really appreciate about how Vey talks about the past, right? She emphasizes that it's both, we look to it, and of course, we're not just or merely nostalgic, that there's something. And so I appreciate the way you're talking about recapitulation. It emphasizes that sort of moving back through in a way that's not just going to the past and staying there, but actually saying that we ourselves we recognize our world is broken. We have to be reformed as people and as communities and as institutions. And the way to do that is by going back through it all and not taking for granted what's been given. So I just really appreciate that sort of process, that emphasis. Of course, ressourcement gets that too, but.
And time isn't real. Chronological time is not really real. It's not going back. There's no going back. It's just movement.
Yeah.
That's what the liturgy is saying too. We're current with where we're coming from and where we're going. It's all like right here and now, and it's drawing us in.
Right. And then at the core of it is like, we're not alienated from all of this. We are participants in it and invited to carry it forward.
Yeah.
Go forth, the mass is ended.
Yeah. Wait, and Spencer, was there another part? I was responding to what you said about recapitulation and the worker
waves
movement.
of the worker.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think you answered that, because I think, like I said, especially what I was appreciating is that sense of like, everything is so broken, we have to move back through in a way that, of course, isn't saying like the way that other people do things is bad or something like that, but just that, like you said, like the moment that we're in seems to be calling forth, not just in our community, but in other communities that we're close with and are inspired by too, and see as sort of friends in the movement, that there's the sense of what our moment requires is that recapitulatory move that I think has the potential to bring new life, and is something that certainly we're seeing here.
Yeah, in that sense that, like, I mean, of course, we all bemoan many things go on in society around us, and we could protest them, and we should in some way. But what is the life that what is the way itself? And it's like finding that, because gosh, like I think that the background of most of the things we're talking about is our sense that it's probably impossible, or it's some sort of idealism. So anyway, yeah. So I think, another answer to your question that I think would be in sympathy with your own understanding of things would be, we need to refine the way itself rather than just bemoaning and inveighing against like social evils.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for all you two have done to try and find the radical sources of life, shall we say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys have given me hope. I needed to hear what you had to say today. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, and hopefully it's an opportunity to be in more relationship because we love the things that you guys do, but we're not super familiar with them, just as maybe you weren't super familiar with us. But now, yeah, we've done something together, so maybe there'll be more.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we're honored to be on your podcast. Thank you.